Before we begin the story of Nikalos, a man who turned pain into power, take a moment to subscribe to our channel, my friends. Because here, we believe every struggle deserves a voice, and every dream has a heartbeat. Tap that subscribe button, like this video, and join us in this journey of hope and humanity. Now let's go back to the year 1901, where the story of Nikalos begins. The boy from the red earth. The sun rose slowly over Ndalika, a small village tucked between the wide savannas and whispering acacia trees of East Africa. The morning mist danced above the fields, and a faint smell of burnt wood mixed with the earth after rain. That was the morning Nikalos was born, not in a hospital, not in a bed, but on a mat of woven reeds beneath an open sky. His mother, Zuberi, looked at him and whispered, "You will be the man who never bows to storms." His father, Makono, was a farmer, strong hands, tired eyes, but a proud heart. Life in Ndalika was not easy. The land gave only what you worked for, and sometimes not even that. The colonial rule was spreading across the continent, taking land, taxing farmers, and demanding labor. By the time Nikalos was 10, he already knew hunger like an old friend. There were days the family survived on roasted maize and rainwater. But Nikalos never complained. He would look up at the mountains and whisper to himself, "Someday, I'll stand where the clouds touch." He was fascinated by learning, something rare in those days. The village missionary, Father Thomas, had opened a small hut school. The first time Nikalos saw a book, he thought it was a piece of folded magic. He traced his fingers over the letters, trying to feel their meaning. Father Thomas noticed the boy's curiosity. "You have eyes that want to see beyond the sky," he said. From then on, Nikalos spent every dawn walking miles barefoot to attend lessons. He learned English slowly, writing with charcoal on banana leaves when paper ran out. But knowledge came at a cost. Every hour in school meant one less helping his father on the farm. Soon, Makono grew angry. "Words don't feed the stomach," he would shout. "Go tend to the goats, boy." Yet Nikalos refused to give up. At night, when the world slept, he studied by the flickering light of an oil lamp, whispering words to the stars. One night, a storm tore through Ndalika. The wind howled like 1,000 spirits. The roof of their hut flew away, the crops flooded. When morning came, their field, their life, was gone. Makono sat silently, staring at the drowned soil. But young Nikalos stood beside him and said, "Father, maybe we can grow something new." Makono turned, surprised. "What can grow in ruin?" "Hope," said Nikalos. That single word changed everything. He began helping rebuild the huts, guiding younger kids to school, and planting new seeds in the washed soil. His hands bled from work, but his smile never faded. The villagers began to call him the boy who talks to the earth. By 16, he had learned enough to read letters for the entire village. When the government sent tax notices in English, it was Nikalos who explained them. When traders came with unfair deals, it was Nikalos who spoke back. He became a voice, calm but unyielding. Then came the year 1910, when the colonial guards arrived, taking men for forced labor on the railway. They came for Makono too. "Your father must serve," said the officer coldly. Zuberi cried, clutching her husband's arm. But Nikalos stepped forward, trembling yet brave. "Take me instead," he said. The officer laughed. You're just a boy who knows the weight of a man's duty," replied Nikalos. And so, at 17, he left Ndalika to work hundreds of miles away, hammering iron under a sun that burned like fire. Every swing of the hammer echoed his promise. "I will return stronger." At night, lying under the open sky beside exhausted men, Nikalos listened to their stories of pain, of stolen lands, of lost names. And yet, he noticed something. When the men sang, the stars seemed to shine brighter. That's when Nikalos realized, even in suffering, there is power. He began writing down their songs, their words, their dreams, using torn pieces of cloth and coal from the fire. He said, "If our voices are remembered, then we are never truly gone." Months later, when he returned to Ndalika, he carried not gold, not riches, but a notebook full of songs and lessons. His father, now older, looked at him with tears. "You left a boy," he said. But you came back with a fire. Did him. He whispered, "Someday my people will not bow. Someday, knowledge will be our freedom." And in that moment, a new chapter began, not just for Nikalos, but for the spirit of Africa itself. When Nikalos returned to Ndalika after months of harsh labor on the railway, his body had grown lean and strong, but his eyes carried something deeper, a quiet fire, born of endurance and vision. The fields were still wounded from years of floods and neglect, but the village greeted him with joy. Children ran behind him, shouting, "Nikalos has returned, the man who speaks to the stars." He smiled, setting down his small sack. Inside, there were no riches, only tools, a few seeds, and his precious notebook filled with songs and words he'd written by firelight. That night, as the village gathered, he stood before them and said, "We can't wait for others to save us. We are our own beginning." He proposed building a community garden, a field where everyone could work together and share the harvest. The elders were skeptical. "That's not how things are done," one said. "The land is tired," said another. But Nikalos only smiled. "Then let us teach the land how to dream again." The next morning, before dawn, he began alone, digging, planting, and clearing weeds. Slowly, others joined. First the children, then the women, and finally even the elders who had doubted him. Day after day, Nikalos led with his hands in the soil and his heart in the future. He taught them new ways to irrigate using clay pots, how to rotate crops, and how to store seeds safely. Months passed. The once barren field bloomed with maize, beans, and hope. For the first time in years, laughter echoed across Ndalika. The harvest was more than food. It was proof that unity could heal even what the storm had destroyed. One evening, as the sun painted the horizon gold, Nikalos sat with his father. Makono looked at him quietly and said, "You were right, son. Hope can grow in ruin." Nikalos placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "You taught me to work the earth, father. I only learned to listen to it." But beneath the peace of Ndalika, a new storm was forming. The colonial officers had heard of villages organizing without permission. They feared unity. They feared men like Nikalos. Soon, a letter arrived demanding increased taxes and land contributions. Those who refuse, the message warned, will lose their rights to farm. The people were terrified. Years of fear had taught them silence. But Nikalos refused to bow. "Our hands feed this land," he said at the gathering. "No one can own what was born with us." He wrote a petition, carefully using the English he had learned as a boy, explaining how unfair the demand was. He collected signatures, fingerprints pressed into ink, each one a symbol of courage. Then, one morning, Nikalos walked for days under the scorching sun to deliver it to the district office. When he arrived, guards laughed. "You think they'll listen to a villager?" one sneered. But Nikalos stood tall. "Maybe not today, but they will remember I spoke." Weeks passed with no reply. The people began losing hope again. Crops were confiscated. Some families were arrested. The village that once sang now whispered in fear. But Nikalos did not stop. He visited nearby villages, spreading knowledge, teaching people how to read, write, and record their grievances. He said, "If we can write our truth, we can't be erased." Word spread. Soon, farmers from neighboring towns came to hear him speak. Under the old baobab tree, hundreds gathered. Nikalos stood on a stone and spoke with calm conviction. "They can take our land, but they cannot take our will. The sun does not choose whose skin it warms. We were born from this earth, and we will rise with it." His voice carried across the plains. For the first time, people believed that change was not impossible, only waiting for courage. But the government did not ignore him for long. One night, soldiers entered Ndalika. They burned the petition, seized the crops, and dragged Nikalos away in chains. Zuberi screamed, clutching her son's shirt, but the soldiers pushed her aside. "You speak too loudly," one said. They locked him in a stone cell miles away. Days passed. No food, no light. Only the sound of wind through the cracks. But even in darkness, Nikalos was not broken. He remembered his mother's voice. "You will be the man who never bows to storms." He began carving words into the wall with a piece of stone. "Freedom is not the wind that blows around us. It is the fire that lives within." that lives within. Months later, after endless silence, he was released. Weakened, barefoot, but unshaken. When he returned to Ndalika, he found ashes, the fields burned, homes destroyed. Many families had fled. His mother was gone. His father's hut stood empty. He fell to his knees, gripping the soil. The pain was unbearable. For the first time in his life, he felt truly alone. But then, a small sound broke through the silence, a child's voice. Nikalos. He turned. It was a young boy holding a tattered page from Nikalos's old notebook. "My father said you taught him to read," the boy whispered. "He said you'd come back." Nikalos took the page. It was one of the songs he'd written years ago by the railway fires. Even when they silence our songs, the earth remembers the tune. Tears filled his eyes, but a smile followed. He stood and said softly, "Then the song is not over." With the help of the few who remained, Nikalos began rebuilding. This time, not just farms, but futures. He taught the children under the same tree where he once learned his first word. He shared stories of courage, songs of unity, and the importance of knowledge. When neighboring villages saw Ndalika rise again, they joined hands. A movement began, not of rebellion, but of awakening. Nikalos's words became a symbol of strength whispered from one town to another. We rise not because we are many, but because we remember who we are. Years later, as an older man, he was invited to a town school newly opened by local leaders. They asked him to speak to the children. He looked at their bright faces and said, "I was born on the red earth, and I learned that nothing grows without struggle. But when you plant with hope, even the hardest ground becomes a garden." The children clapped. Some of them were descendants of those who once worked beside him in the fields. As he walked out into the sun, a gentle wind carried dust across the road. Warm, red, familiar. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Mother, the storms have passed." That night, he sat beneath the stars, the same stars he'd watched as a boy, and opened his old notebook. On the final page, he wrote, "We were the seeds. The storm did not bury us. It planted us." And as he closed the book, he smiled, because Nikalos knew that the legacy of one man's courage can feed generations. The year was 1942, and the winds of war and change were sweeping across the world. But in a quiet village in East Africa, far from the noise of empires and armies, an old man named Nikalos sat beneath a weathered tree, watching the sunset melt into gold. Children played nearby, their laughter rising like birds. The sound brought a soft smile to his face. He remembered his own childhood, bare feet in the red earth, eyes full of wonder and hunger for knowledge. He had survived storms that broke nations, but he carried no bitterness, only gratitude. Every scar on his hands told a story of labor, of faith, of standing tall when silence would have been easier. As the evening wind blew through the acacia branches, a young woman approached him. She was carrying a small bundle of notebooks, their covers made from reused paper. "Teacher," she said respectfully, "the school is ready. The children are waiting." Nikalos rose slowly, leaning on his carved wooden cane. His movements were slow now, but his voice still carried strength. "Then let's not keep them waiting," he said with a gentle smile. The school of Ndalika was no grand building, just 4 mud walls and a roof made of palm thatch. But to the villagers, it was a temple of dreams. On the wall, someone had painted in white chalk, "Knowledge is the seed of freedom." Nikalos stepped inside, the children standing as he entered. He looked around the room, faces of all shades and ages, from farmers' sons to shepherds' daughters, eyes wide with the same hunger he'd once felt. He spoke softly. "When I was your age, we had no books. We had only hope. Today, you have both. Guard them well." He told them stories, not from books, but from life. Stories of his father who tilled the soil until his hands bled. Of his mother, who taught him that courage can live in silence. Of the men who sang under the stars while building the iron roads. And he ended each story with the same words. "You are not small. You are the beginning." Years passed, and the school grew. More huts were added, then a well, then a library. Traders and travelers began calling Ndalika the Village of Light. People from neighboring towns came to learn from Nikalos, not just reading and writing, but leadership, compassion, and pride in their identity. Even colonial officials, once dismissive, began to take notice. They saw that the people of Ndalika worked harder, traded fairly, and caused no unrest. They didn't realize that Nikalos's quiet revolution had already succeeded, not with weapons, but with wisdom. In 1957, long after Nikalos had turned 60, a young man from the city came to meet him. He introduced himself as Samuel, a teacher, activist, and admirer of Nikalos's work. "Sir," Samuel said, "you may not know it, but your words have reached the cities. Your songs are being sung by students. Your name has become a symbol of hope." Nikalos chuckled softly. "Hope doesn't belong to one man, my son. It grows wherever hearts are open." Samuel handed him a paper, a letter from a group of young Africans fighting for freedom from colonial rule. At the bottom, they had written, "Inspired by the spirit of Ndalika." Tears welled in the old man's eyes. He never sought recognition, only purpose. But now he knew his purpose had grown wings. As the years rolled on, Africa began to change. One by one, nations rose to claim their voices. Flags changed, borders shifted, but the heart of the struggle remained. The belief that no one was born to kneel forever. And though Nikalos was too old to march or speak at rallies, his words traveled further than his feet ever could. Children he once taught became teachers themselves. His notebook of songs, once written on railway nights, was now copied and shared across towns, translated into new languages, sung in new rhythms. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rolled over the hills, Nikalos sat by the window of his small hut. His health had begun to fade, but his spirit was brighter than ever. He took out his old notebook, the one that had survived storms, fire, and years. On the last empty page, he wrote, "The earth I loved will forget my name, but it will not forget the seeds I planted. For I was never one man. I was every hand that rose from dust." He placed the notebook beside a wooden carving of a tree, the same tree under which he'd once learned to write as a boy. Outside, rain fell gently over Ndalika. The fields shimmered like rivers of silver. When the sun returned the next morning, the villagers found him seated peacefully by the window, his notebook open, his eyes closed, his lips curved in a faint smile. They buried him beneath the baobab tree, where his journey had begun. On his grave, they carved his words, "We were the seeds." Years turned into decades. The world changed, radios, roads, cities, and schools filled with light. But in the heart of Africa, people still spoke of a man who had taught them to believe in themselves. Grandmothers told children, "When the storms come, remember Nikalos. He taught us that even the broken ground can bloom." Teachers hung his words on classroom walls. Farmers recited his songs during harvests. And every time the wind blew over Ndalika's fields, the people swore they could still hear his voice whispering through the leaves. "Stand tall, my children. You are the sun after the storm." One day, many years later, Samuel, now an old man himself, returned to Ndalika. He walked to the baobab tree, kneeling before the grave of his mentor. In his hand was a small wooden plaque. He placed it gently into the earth. It read, "Here lies Nikalos, the man who turned silence into song, and planted hope that never dies." He looked up at the sky, now glowing orange with sunset. The same light that once shone on a young dreamer in 1901 now bathed the land in warmth. And as the first stars appeared, Samuel whispered, "The sun over Ndalika still rises." Sunrise over Mountains epilogue. Years later, when historians wrote about Africa's awakening, they spoke of warriors, leaders, and revolutions. But in the quiet corners of truth, they also wrote about one man, Nikalos, who never picked up a weapon, yet won the greatest war, the war against despair. His story became part of oral traditions, his words painted on school walls, his name remembered not as a hero, but as a teacher of hope. And so, Nikalos lived on, not in statues or songs, but in every heart that believed the impossible was still within reach. Because some people shine so brightly, even time cannot dim their light.